Okay, today I'm going to work on a Turbo Duo. Um, Quite a rare system. It is the first CD system. It came out right before Sega CD did. But the Duo is a later uh, console revision where the Hue card and the CD are in the same console, unlike the TG-16 and the TG-CD. It's a fairly rare console. It's highly sought after. Very expensive. Very expensive. So I'm going to take care with this one. I laid a cloth over my table so I'm not scratching anything, and the surface is very sensitive to scratches, so when I flip it over I'm laying it on something that won't scratch it. But the customer has complained about audio issues. One of the biggest problems with the Turbo Duo is capacitor failures. They are plagued by it. If you have a Turbo Duo and you haven't had the caps replaced, it will eventually start failing one way or another. Usually audio is the first. There might be CD problems where they won't read CDs, or it's just having problems all around, but these are surface mount caps, apparently fairly poor quality, and I'll show you here in a second. I just got done testing this for over an hour and I had zero audio issues, and so I'm a little bit concerned about what I'm going to find in there. There may be nothing wrong, or there may be something wrong with the customer's power supply, or maybe the AV cord he had was had some opens in it or something like that. But he agrees that replacing the caps is a good idea, and we're going to go ahead and do it anyway, even if they don't, even if they're not completely blown out and leaked and dried out. As of right now, we're going to go ahead and do it anyway. Okay, the top's off. The only shield on here is one screw on this side and is soldered at the controller port, and then there's two wires soldered on these tabs on the back. Oops, forgot a screw. One in the front. Okay, as you can see, there are a lot of caps inside the Turbo Duo, but the ones that we're really interested in looking at are these surface mount ones, and there's a bunch of those. There are some through-hole caps, which we will replace also, but never seen one of those go bad. They are pretty good quality. Can't see a manufacturer. That one looks like Elna, and the light blue ones are Rubicons. Let's see, the black one's Rubicons, which is a really good brand. No idea about the surface mount, but I can tell by looking at a few of them that they have been leaking a little bit. I'll get a close-up on that. A lot of them look pretty good, and we'll be able to tell by just looking at the solder. When they leak, the actual solder itself corrodes. Let me get the camera over here in a better direction. Okay, here's a row of caps that are actually pretty nice, but this one on the end, you can tell just by the discoloration of the solder that it's leaked and the solder's corroded. I'm going to put the old eye loop in front of the camera trick and do that again. Might be a little bit too much light, but you can tell the solder on that one is still nice and shiny. Let's see if I can zoom in here. Okay, and then if you go over to that one, you can tell just by looking at it, it's got some serious corrosion on it. Now, I want to get the LCR meter out and see if I can do some capacitance testing. I'm not sure if the readings are going to come out very well on the screen over here, but here's one of the ones that looked pretty clean. It's reading 4.46 and it is a 4.7 microfarad cap, but the one that I showed that was corroded, I cannot get a good reading on. It's showing negative 4.4. No matter how much I scrape on those. Let's try one way over here. This one's supposed to be 100. Must be parallel to a bunch of other caps because it's showing 600 microfarads. It's pretty common. Must be on a parallel. This one looks like it's, yeah, also that's on the same parallel, looks like. And this one back here looks kind of corroded. Also negative 4 again. It's supposed to be a 22. Let's flip the board over and try some of these through holes. Okay, let's try this big fat one here. It's a 470. Again, it's in parallel with a bunch of other ones. Showing 690. Let's see. 2000. Another 470, but obviously in parallel with a bunch of other stuff. $316. This top number here is supposed to be ESR. One might be kind of high, but maybe not for that high of a capacitance. It's supposed to be a 330. That one's right on. Although it looks like the ESR is kind of high. I actually have to do these out of circuit. I mean, they're all going to get replaced anyway, so let's do that. while I was messing around trying to pull a cap out, one of these surface mount ones just came right off its pads. And that could be disastrous because it'll actually lift the traces off the motherboard. But it looks like it had just corroded enough to where it basically just fell off. Looks like a lot of corrosion right there though. But it's something to be careful of. It looks like some of the other ones around there might be fairly corroded too. But anyway, I'm going to get back to pulling the rest of these. Let's see if I can get a reading on this one that just decided to fall off. $1,500 nanofarads, which is equivalent to, let's say, 1.25 microfarads, and it's supposed to be a 22 microfarad. So yeah, this one obviously had leaked and lost most of its capacitance. I didn't see the PSR of it though. Let's try it again. Oh my. This top smaller number right here, 15. That's ohms. That is terrible. That one definitely bad. Okay, how about some of the through hole ones we just pulled off here? This one is a 330 microfarad. We still got 307 microfarads, so it's not terrible. ESR 0.075, pretty good for 330. Like I said, even though it's still in good shape, it's a 20-year-old cap, so we're certainly not going to hurt anything by replacing it. This one is a 1,000 microfarad. Still showing right around 1,000. Just have some corrosion on the legs here. There we go. Series resistance still pretty low. And of course this is the Rubicon branded caps, so, and the other ones were the Elna. To be expected that they're still in pretty good shape. This is supposed to be a 470, still got 433, still low series resistance. Another 470, this one's actually still really close to rated capacitance. Low resistance. Another 470. 424, not bad. Low resistance. So kind of proves that you get what you pay for, and when you pay for Rubicons, you pay for good quality. This one's a 220, so this one's dropped, and resistance is pretty high at 0.1. So this one definitely needed replaced. It's one of those Elna ones. I'm not going to remember where these came from either. This one's supposed to be a 330, 306, not terrible. 0.07 ohms, not terrible. Another 330, we're at 310, 0.07, not terrible. and this one's 100, so it's at 96, but 0.17 ohms resistance is not great for that low of a cap rating. So that's most of the through holes, and I'm going to switch over to getting the surface mount caps off. And a lot of people will just use heat and maybe like lift one side of the cap up, kind of rock it off. I don't like that because there's a lot of traces on this motherboard that will lift with any kind of heat and a little bit of pressure, any kind of force, and sometimes no force at all. Just the heat will make the trace lift, and of course we want to avoid that. And the last time I did one of these, I found that just plain old cutting them off, and having a force parallel with the trace will leave it intact. And most times what happens is I just end up cutting the legs off of the cap. If I just go in there like that, let me zoom in on this, do one close up here. Okay. If I just go in at the side and just snap it off, usually I'll this one actually left the legs on, but usually on the smaller ones it'll just cut it right off, but it leaves the pads nice and intact. Of course I want to watch components, so maybe go in from the other side here. I'm not worried about ruining the caps, just the traces. See that one of those legs got cut off as I pulled it. And another good thing is we have a very good map online posted on the PC Engine FX forums of what each cap value is. So when I'm not really worried about keeping track of this size cap went on this pad or whatever. I can just reference the map. So let's go ahead and cut the rest of these off here and get started on soldering new ones. Okay, another reason to do it this way, speed. You can spend an hour trying to heat one side of the cap and lift it and rock it off. That took me, what, 2 minutes? I think I lifted one trace right here. It looks like C102. Let's see if I can zoom in here. C102 right there. You can see the trace right there. It has lifted from the board. The very first time I tried doing a recap, I tried heating one side of the cap and rocking it off. I even bought heated tweezers. Fail, really. They were too big to get onto these little caps. A great idea, but didn't work. And trying to heat one side and rock it off, I think I lifted more traces doing it that way than I did with just cutting them off. I'm doing that real quick. Now, I like to go back and run the soldering iron over each pad, because usually there is a piece of leg still attached to one of the pads. And just push it off. Just like that. And after I do that, I will go back and also solder on, or add some new solder to each pad, because we are going to solder on leaded caps. So I'll go around and do all that little cleanup business. Kind of made a hell of a mess in here. Some of these pads were corroded underneath the capacitor, so I had to add quite a bit of solder and flux and scrape it around a bit just to get the solder to stick to the old pad. So there's all kinds of burnt flux residue all around there, so I'm going to spray some degreaser on it and see if I can't clean it up. Okay, on the one capacitor, I had a lifted trace. I'm going to lift the trace a little bit and try to put some super glue under it just to keep it from flopping around too much. You can't see it on camera, but it doesn't really matter. It's just like it sounds. That way when I solder to it later, I won't be worried about tearing the trace off completely. Okay, something else I'm also worried about is after I cleaned it up, there's quite a few spots in this area that were really badly corroded that didn't really show through until after I cleaned it up some. So I'm probably going to test the traces from the pads to whatever vias or wherever they're going to make sure that they actually do have continuity on them before I solder a bunch of capacitors back on everywhere and can't access them as well. Okay, I've cleaned up quite a bit of the corrosion. I just want to get a close-up of what some of this really looks like. You can see the solder mask has been corroded away from the actual copper layer. That's just one near the front of the board. If we go back into the power section, you'll see it again in a couple places. But we still have good continuity. It's a very good example of the solder mask has been corroded away, but the copper is still there. So now I guess we'll get started putting the capacitors back on. pause for a second here and give a little warning for. See if I can get that there. Come on, camera. Okay, capacitors that come like this, you want to cut those legs off and not just peel the tape off of them, because that tape residue will stay on the legs and it's a possible problem when you're soldering it back into the circuit board. So, you know, just take your cutters and cut it off. Leave the legs and the tape and just throw them away. That way the legs that are left are nice and clean and you won't have any problem soldering with. Okay, that's it for the caps. There's enough. I've left enough legs on each cap that I can actually bend them over and lay them down until they hit the motherboard or something, some other component maybe. I feel a little bit better about laying them down. It would also provide a good way to put some hot glue or something to that effect on each cap, just to make sure it's not going anywhere. I do know this one on the end has to be pretty well vertical to fit back into the case. I've had problems with that the last time I did one. But there we have it. All the caps are back in. I think I'll put it back together somewhat and test it. Mr. B、リアル財団のスティーブ会長、天才物理学者ガルシア博士。彼ら4人を中心とした。Okay, so I'm letting it loop through Red Alert Japanese game, CD game, and all the audio and sound effects seem to be fine, but I'll let it continue looping for, I don't know, maybe an hour, and then I'll come back and actually play through the game a little bit just to make sure both PCM and Redbook are all okay. Okay, so it tested out okay. I was going to zoom in and show what I do with a capacitor. All I'm doing is taking needle nose pliers and bending the legs out like that, and then just cutting them off basically flush with the side of the cap, and then just putting some flux on the end of it and even on the pads of the capacitor that I cut off. That's all that's really happening with the capacitor replacement right there. There's no real trick to it. It just takes a lot of time and effort. Okay, here's the console all put back together. Of course, there's other mods been done to it in the meantime, but it's been looping Red Alert for a couple hours, and I just got done playing the game a little bit, and all the other sound effects and everything were fine. So the cap replacement was a success.